So as we began, the title for today's session is From One to Many, Multi-Level ESL, and we really have an expert here to share with us her expertise in this area as well as her experience, and we will have opportunities for you to participate in an interactive way throughout this webinar. One of the reasons that we identified this topic is because we heard from the field and from our advisory board that multi-level ESL classes were going to become more and more needed and more popular, and more frequently the way in which we are able to deliver ESL services to our adult students. And we wanted to have an opportunity to start the year off by providing you some support in that area, hence this webinar. And we wanted to make sure that we had a facilitator who really was skilled and knowledgeable in this area, hence Supan, who is also going to be teaching our online multi-level ESL class for us. Sue will be covering in today's session some highlights on multi-level instruction, and specifically she'll be addressing putting together a single lesson plan for multi-level instruction, activities that you can do for differentiated learning, ideas for organizing your classroom, and then one of the really critical areas for successful multi-level ESL classes is empowering your learners to take some responsibility for their own learning. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Sue, who will be leading us in the discussion today. And Sue, welcome, and thank you again for facilitating.
Thank you, Charisse, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I see that there are a good 30 of us this afternoon, and some of us, Elaine and Anna, are first time in a webinar, so I hope that this is a good experience for you. I'd like to say that I've had the opportunity to work with dozens of multi-level teachers in the Oakland CBET and Family Literacy Program since the year 2000. And this afternoon I look forward to sharing their best practices with you, along with principles from my facilitation of the CALPRO workshop, Managing the ESL Multi-Level class. In any ESL class, there's a range of different abilities, but today we're focusing on classes that are designated multi-level, with great differences in language proficiency. From the opening survey, and I thank you all for participating in that, I saw that 60% of you have more than 6 years of ESL teaching experience. And as Charisse mentioned, while we may have ESL teaching experience, multi-level may be new to us. I am humbled by your dedication and your challenge to engage all your students in learning. And during this hour, I'd like to ask you to listen for one idea, either from me or from your colleagues, that will help you in your class next week. I'd also like to ask you to jot down your questions. If they aren't answered during the presentation, as Charisse said, there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end. And finally, Barbara will show you how to download a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, as well as the lesson plan format that we will be talking about momentarily. So I'd like to start by asking you to take 1 or 2 minutes to think about your multi-level class. A designated multi-level class has some characteristics different from leveled classes, both from the perspective of the learner and from the perspective of the teacher. So Barbara's going to bring on a chatpod 4. So if you could please share with us some differences you see in a multi-level class. And we'll take 1 or 2 minutes to do this. I see a lot of challenges, difficulties. I'm wondering, are there any advantages? Okay, we have a few more people typing. I'd like to ask you to finish your sentence there. Some things that I'm seeing, and I'm trying to go back here, from Julie. I never feel fulfilled as a teacher. That's a hard one. Nor feel that the students are completely satisfied. And I hope that we can address some of that today. And Elaine uses a phrase that I often use. It's like a one-room schoolhouse. And many of you are echoing our overall goal, and I think why you're here today is we want to engage all of our students, and we feel that the higher end are bored, sometimes the lower are bored. So what we want to do today is try to engage all of our students in learning. There's also, I see many people talking about the pace at which different students work, and some finish earlier, some finish later, and what do you do? All right, well, thank you very much. You have a lot to say and a lot to add. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on with the presentation. A question that often comes up is, what is the research on multi-level ESL? Well, there is some research on specific strategies to engage all learners, but I haven't come across any general research on multi-level ESL. Marion Burt of the National Clearinghouse for ESL Literacy Education at the Center for Applied Linguistics reviewed literature at the Education Resource Information Center. And she concluded that, quote, no hard generalizable research was discussed in any article, unquote, on teaching the multi-level ESL class. So today I'm going to share with you best practices. And I will refer to Jill Bell and her book, Teaching Multi-Level Classes in ESL, Lenore Balliro's article, Ideas for a Multi-Level Class, and Nancy Hampson and Marilyn Knight Mendelson here in California, authors of the CALPRO workshop, Managing the ESL Multi-Level Class. I sometimes hear teachers new to multi-level saying that they teach to the middle, or they are overwhelmed with preparing 3 or 4 lesson plans for a single session. Today I'd like to offer you an alternative. The alternative is a single multi-level ESL plan that has 3 characteristics. The first being that it is topic-driven as opposed to skill-driven. The second characteristic is that there are differentiated objectives for the different levels that you have, or some of the different levels. You don't want to be writing 30 different objectives for your students, as well as differentiated learning activities for the different levels. So now let's look at some examples of these characteristics. Topic-driven lessons are life skills competency-based lessons as opposed to language or skill-based. So take a moment to look at some of the examples that I have here. Many of you already teach topic-driven lessons. So let's look now at how to develop them for the multi-level class. And let's start with the learning objectives. Here's an example from Jill Bell of different learning objectives for a single lesson. The topic is reviewing reviewing an invitation, and then she provides a learning objective for each of 3 levels. The beginning students will learn a set phrase such as, "I'm sorry, I can't." The intermediate level students will add a reason for refusing the invitation. And the advanced students will address nuances in language formality, as well as to suggest an alternative. Okay, as we move on to look at differentiated learning activities, we'll be using a template based on the WIPIA lesson plan format. So I'd like to quickly review the acronym. Warm-up. Warm-up is where we provide community building activities or we connect with students' previous learning, such as vocabulary from the day before. In the introduction stage, we focus students' attention on the lesson and set the context by stating the objectives and why it's important. In the presentation stage, we provide instruction on new information, new skills, new content. And in the practice stage, students practice those new skills we just taught and modeled. In the evaluation stage, we assess each student's attainment of their lesson objective. And in the application, students apply their new learning to their own lives in an authentic way. So now let's look at a multi-level WIPIA lesson plan template. Now let me see if I can get my little arrow here. Oh my goodness. I'll keep working at that. This template is from the CALPRO workshop. Barbara, can you give me a hand? Here we go. So on the left, you'll see the WIPIA lesson plan stages that we just reviewed. The warm-up introduction presentation stages here is a good opportunity for us to provide whole class activities. A reason for beginning as a whole class is in a multi-level class, students can feel isolated, either by their English level or by other factors like ethnicity. So community building activities in the warm-up stage can help students to see their commonalities. For example, in our CBET family literacy classes, parents' common challenge and goal is to support their children's success in school. Community building is also an opportunity for students to see their differences as being complementary strengths for the entire class. For example, personal talents or differing language strengths in reading, writing, or speaking. And despite their differences, students feel that they belong in the class. And community building can also be an advantage in the multi-level class. In the introduction and presentation stages, which are also whole class activities, you'll want to engage all levels of your learners by using different modalities, including visuals, realia, music, and multimedia. In the practice stage, we want to provide differentiated learning activities for the advanced, the intermediate, and the beginning level students. And there are two ways of doing this. One is through likability or same level activities. Another way is through crossability or heterogeneous groups of mixed levels. And we'll have some examples of this in a few moments. The application stage is a time to bring the whole class back together again, because we want to feel like we are a class community. Okay. So now let's look at some examples of the two kinds of differentiated learning activities, likability and crossability. Whoops, sorry about that. I'm wanting to enlarge this screen. Maybe Barbara, can you help me do that? Pull it over to the right. Thank you. Likability means same level, and these activities students can do as individuals, pairs, or as a group. And this example comes from one of our teachers in Oakland, Elizabeth Wendt. The topic is explain your skills and talents to others. And after a whole class introduction to vocabulary, Elizabeth provides sentence frames for the practice stage. The beginning level students practice the verbs in simple present tense. The intermediate students practice those same verbs in present continuous tense, as well as adding adjectives. So for example, I am careful, so I'm good at filing. I'm friendly, so I'm good at helping others. And again, these likability or same level activities can be done individually, in pairs, or in groups. I've been kind of talking quite a bit now, so I'd like to check in with you before moving on to crossability or heterogeneous group activities. I got it. Provide likability or same level learning activities for a multi-level class within a single lesson plan. So in your attendee bar that Barbara showed you, the little man at the top, and I don't think there's a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but there is a check for agree or X for disagree, if you can indicate to me whether you got it. Provide likability, same level learning activities for a multi-level class within a single lesson plan. I'm seeing some positive response here. All right. Thank you. It looks like most of us got it. So I hope that you see that there are some things that you can do right away with your class. So let's move on to crossability heterogeneous activities. And these are activities in groups, ideally of 3 or 4 learners. You don't want the groups to be too big. And in each group, you might have a beginning, intermediate, and an advanced level student. And each of these students has a different task appropriate to his or her level. But that task is needed to complete a group product. I'd like to borrow a term from cooperative learning principles. Positive interdependence, meaning that no student can complete the assignment by him or herself. They need each other. And I'll give an example of this in the next slide. But before I move on, I want to say that in addition to developing language skills in crossability or heterogeneous groups where students are interdependent, this is also an opportunity for them to develop soft skills for employability. So, let's take a look at an example. Again, I borrow from one of my teachers, Marilyn Noble. and her topic is interviewing school staff. Her students work in groups of 3, and the product is to produce a staff profile for the school bulletin board. So if you can imagine a bulletin board with profiles of the principal, the secretary, custodian, etc. The intermediate student asks the interview questions. The advanced student writes the answers. And the beginning level student takes the photo and identifies the interviewee's name for the caption. So I think here, I hope you can see here that in a heterogeneous or cross-ability group, students of mixed levels can work at their own level and together produce a class product or an assignment. I'd like to ask you now to take 2 minutes to think of and to share a class product that your students have done that can lend itself to cross-ability or heterogeneous groups that incorporate different level tasks. So again, we'll bring the chat pod to the forefront here, and please share your ideas. Oh, I see Lung is already writing. Oh, this might be an answer to the previous question. So this question is, give an example of a cross-ability or heterogeneous group activity that incorporates different tasks. Betty Harrington shares role plays. Yes, you can vary the role plays, and things that are open-ended, students can rise to their level of English proficiency. Thank you, Betty. Well, your ideas are coming through. Martha suggests a map project where lower level students can use pictures, intermediates drawing, and drawing a street grid that uses more English, and advanced students naming businesses and giving the presentation. Susan, thank you for Jigsaw. Jigsaw is perfect for heterogeneous cross-ability group activities. I don't know how to pronounce your name, Nieves. This is one that's easy to implement with vocabulary. Students practice, beginners practicing writing the vocabulary, whereas intermediates can write sentences and advanced students write a story. All right, so let's take a few minutes to read all of your suggestions, and we'll talk more about classroom management. Pamela, dictation is one that I've seen done very well. with spelling words. With beginning level students, you could give a blank with just the initial consonant, whereas the advanced students spelled a whole word or the sentence. Again, spelling and vocabulary is a good one to have different levels. All right, I'd like to thank everyone for your ideas of heterogeneous or cross-ability group activities that incorporate different tasks. I sometimes hear teachers say that, and I saw in the first chat pod of what does a multi-level, I'm trying to look back to see what the prompt was. What differences do you see in a multi-level class? And we are often concerned about the very beginning literacy level students and the more advanced. And I often hear teachers say that these two ends of the spectrum don't feel like they are learning. So I think it's very important for us as teachers to articulate explicit student learning at the beginning of the lesson as well as at the end. And for our advanced students, they can keep a log or a journal with the prompt, "How did I use English in class today?" Or, "How will I use it outside of class?" What we've been talking about thus far in this webinar is the what of multi-level lessons. I'd like to now address the how. Let's look at how does grouping activities work. As you can see, the multi-level class can be more dynamic in movement than a single level class. And I think it's important to take time. Take time to establish routines to help students move into different groups smoothly. And one way of doing that is through color coding of groups. I think you've also seen that students will sometimes be in Likeability or same level groups, and sometimes in cross-ability groups. So I think we need to establish a class environment and class expectations that students will have different seats. I've been to more traditional classrooms where this is this student's seat and forever shall be, not in a multi-level class. And inevitably, I see traditional classroom setups of rows evolve to table groups. And just in Oakland, last year in June, I saw 2 classes ending the year in rows. But now, those 2 classes are now in table groups. So you will find that that enhances group work. Let's talk now about our students. And this is from Jill Bell. Students in a multi-level class cannot be given the luxury of sitting back quietly and letting the teacher carry the burden of responsibility. She goes on to say, new behaviors will be demanded of them. They will be asked to get up out of their chairs and work at different stations. They will be asked to work with students of different abilities. They will be asked to perform tasks that can only be completed with an exchange of information. And they'll be asked to solve problems. So I'd like to ask you to take a moment to think about the students in your class. And I'd like to suggest that students take responsibility for their own learning, their individual learning and their collective learning. And to think about what does that look like. In the chat pod that we will bring up, I'd like to ask you to share an example of how learners can take responsibility for their own learning. And we'll take 2 minutes to do this. So Allison gives students the responsibility of go get your own handouts and assignments when you are absent. And I'm sure you have a system of where they can find that, rather than the teacher spending time in class making sure everybody has the assignment. Students are able to, Jonah suggests, defining vocabulary on their own, asking questions. Thank you, Lindsay. And Timothy suggests at the beginning for them to set their own learning goals and then their responsibility. What are they going to do to reach those goals? And so they take responsibility for that learning. So I see a theme of students being proactive and advocating for themselves, asking questions, telling the teacher what they need from class. And I see several goal-related ideas and tracking their progress to their goals. Okay, if you could take a minute to finish up here, and I have some sentence starters to share with you. Oh, here's one from Alyssa. Students sit next to a student who doesn't speak their same native language. Well, thank you. I'm going to move on. Here are two sentence starters from a teacher, Andy Nash, and it came from Lenore Balliro's article. The two sentence starters are, whoops, whoa, a good student should and a good teacher should. And I've seen a teacher in Oakland do a similar activity with two questions. The first question is, what do you want to learn? And not surprisingly, students say they want to speak more English. So the second question is, what do you need to do to speak more English? And students then come up with, I need to speak X number of times in class. I need to come to class on time. I need to come to class prepared. So from these sentence starters, Andy Nash develops them into class agreements or ground rules of what we, the students, will do, what is our responsibility, and what the teacher will do. So we've been talking about students taking responsibility for their own learning. But what does that mean for you, the teacher? And how might your role be different? Again from Jill Bell, she says, the teacher of the multi-level class has to be prepared to let go of the notion that the teacher is the provider of all good things. You have a multi-level class. You don't have to own it all. Students can help themselves, and students can help each other, as you shared in the last chat pod. So I'd like to ask you to consider your role as a multi-level teacher more as a facilitator of learning, as opposed to a provider of direct instruction, or as a guide on the side, as opposed to a sage on the stage. So take 2 minutes to think about and share an example of what a guide on the side style instructor does. What does a facilitator of learning or a guide on the side style instructor do? Betty says that the instructor listens more and speaks less. Advanced students helping others, creating work groups. And in creating work groups, we need to provide guidelines like clear tasks, and of course circulating. Thank you, Martha. Allison gives us some phrases to use I want you to think about before you provide information. And Lindsay, when a student asks a question, asking the students, does anyone know the answer? And Jonah, yes, we need to give our students time to work it out for themselves rather than us jumping in and quote-unquote fixing it. Thank you. Christine offers setting up activities I remember in elementary school that there were tables or stations, so setting up activities and materials for students to be able to do it on their own. It sounds like many of you already have a lot of the skills and a lot of the practices of being successful in a multi-level class. I think you just need to be confident about that. Thank you. Thank you for your answers. And again, I saw some themes here of not jumping to the answer and letting students help each other or working it out themselves first and giving students leadership roles. Okay, I'm looking at the clock here and it's 2:46, so we need to move on. Thank you, Barbara. Before we transition to your questions, I'd like to go back to the webinar objectives that Cherise shared with you at the beginning of the webinar today. She said you will learn about a single lesson plan for multi-level instruction, and that lesson plan will be available for you to download at the end here. Differentiated learning activities. We talked about Likeability or same level activities, as well as crossability or heterogeneous groups working on one product. Ideas for organizing the multi-level class. You guys had some good ideas there, as well as empowering learners to take responsibility for their own learning. In this last hour, we've heard a lot of ideas, and I thank you for all of your ideas. As I mentioned, I think that you have, in your experience, a lot of activities, a lot of approaches to managing the multi-level class. You may have heard some new ones today, and you'll have to find out what will work for you in your class. Not everything will work for everyone. Please be kind to yourself in trying something new. It may take a couple of times for you to find out whether something will work. And take time to establish routines. Fortunately, our adult students are generally very forgiving in us trying new things. So at the beginning, I asked you to think about or listen for one thing that will help you in your multi-level class. I'd like to hear. So in the chat pod, can you share with us what's something that you might try next week? Lindsay is reminded of students moving around and having different partner groups. Alyssa, establishing routines. That will make life a lot easier, establishing routines. And crossability activities. Julie also will start routines of changing seats. Elaine, I'm glad that the lesson plan worksheet might be helpful to you. It's a good way to organize your thoughts, yes. Carmen, one lesson for 3 groups. It should be easier for you than developing 3 different lesson plans, yes. And Leo is saying, letting students take more of a leadership role. Responsibility for more learning. Arranging the environment. Creating goals. That came from one of our colleagues here today, from Martha. Thank you. Well, I'm happy to hear that in the last hour some of you may have gotten some new ideas, and I hope that you will have gained some confidence in the skills that you already have. We promised you that there would be time for questions. So, and I see in the chat pod on the right, some of you are talking with each other about getting more details about the ideas that you have shared. So, Charisse will tell you at the end of how you can continue to share with each other your ideas. So hang tight. We're going to answer some of your questions, and then Charisse will refer you to additional forums and other opportunities, for example, a virtual workroom where you can continue to work with each other. So, let's take a few minutes to ask, what questions do you have? And here's our last chat pod. What questions do you have? I'm happy to hear that you got a lot of ideas from each other, and Martha has asked about being able to refer to those responses later, your chat pods, and Barbara is saying that they'll be available on the recording. Allison has a question, and yes, students want grammar. I don't have a recommendation. I think you need to, I think that even in life skills or topic-driven lessons, you do teach grammar, and we need to be explicit in pointing out to students the grammar that they are learning. And you may want to try, as you suggest here, 30 or 40 minutes, but I think, as I mentioned earlier, we need to be explicit. We need to explicitly tell students what they're learning, because they may not be aware of that. Oh, Anna has a grammar question too. I think, and well, I'll go back to what I've seen in our classes here in Oakland. Our range in multi-level classes are more like literacy to intermediate low, so similar to Anna's question here. And the example from Elizabeth Went, where she took a verb, and the practice was that the beginning level students used that verb in the simple present tense, and the intermediate students used it in the present continuous. So that is one way to address grammar in the topic-centered teaching. Lindsay asked a question about levels, and certainly one student may be at one level for speaking, but a different level for writing. And I think if you use different groups for different things, I don't know if it matters the label that you give students. You know, when CASAS tests come back, you may want to address more specifically. But I've seen classes that label students beginning low, beginning high. I've seen classes that label students groups by the color, the yellow group, the red group, or even the fantastic group, the beautiful people. So I don't know if it matters the label so much as you want to engage them in learning. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry I didn't get to all of your questions. I'm going to put my email on the chat pod to the left. And Therese, I am so sorry. I need to turn it over to you. And some of these others, if I have your email address, I'll try to respond to you.
Thank you, Sue, very much. You've done a great job. And as Sue is typing her email in the chat pod for you to the left, please be sure and get that. We do have the questions that you've posed in the chat pod here, and we'll get those to Sue. She can try and respond to those. And then, as Sue alluded to earlier, there are a number of other resources and opportunities that we have available for you that can help you continue your learning in the area of multiple level ESL class. In fact, Sue herself is teaching a course that starts in just 2 days, and you are encouraged from this webinar to enroll in that. You will have some of the opportunity to have some of those questions that you've asked again addressed there as well. It starts in 2 days on October the 11th, so please register as soon as you're done with our session here. And if you are in the Southern California area, we will have the face-to-face regional workshop at the Burbank Adult School, and those class dates are listed here, November 7th and January 16th. Those are both offered in the evening, so for those of you who teach during the day, this would be ideal for you. You can go there for the 2 face-to-face sessions, which will be a similar content of what Sue will be providing in the online session. So both of those options are available for you, and you can register for those at calpro-online.org at our events calendar. And then Sue mentioned our virtual workroom for multi-level ESL, and we also have an electronic community of practice. And both of these are online environments where you can continue the conversation. In the workroom, you can work on specific strategies that we have identified there to help ESL instructors be successful in their classrooms. And in the ECOP, you can pose any topic of interest that you have or question that you have around that area, and again have a conversation with colleagues around that topic. Both of those website addresses are here, and we will be providing you with this PowerPoint at the end to download, so you have this resource available. I want to thank you again for your participation in today's webinar. As we close out, just a few reminders for you. Again, I really want to thank Sue. She did a phenomenal job. This was a very engaging and exciting workshop, and really a good kickoff for some of the more in-depth resources that we have available for you to participate in. So Sue, thank you. You'll see that on this slide that you're looking at in front of you, on the lower middle portion of your screen, there are 2 documents that are available for you to download. You can download this PowerPoint as well as the lesson plan grid that Sue addressed. And to do that, upload or download. To do that, you would click on the file that you want and then click Save to My Computer, and it will save it on your computer. You can go ahead and do that now while the course room is open for you. And then to the right of that, we do have a survey that we need your input on, and your feedback and your ideas and suggestions for future webinars. So if you would also take a few moments to complete that survey for us, it is highlighted there in blue. It's the webinar survey. Please complete that as well. And as Sue shared with you, we have a number of webinars coming up designed just for you in the Instructors Forum. And our next one will be on October the 31st. It is called Putting the Professional and Professional Learning Communities, and it will be facilitated by the Director of CalPro, Jacques Lacour, as well as Rachel Munn, who is an adjunct instructor at Pasadena Community College. And that will be October 31st at 2 o'clock, so I hope that you sign up for that. We are also going to have a follow-up to this webinar on multi-level ESL instructional strategies in January, and that will address some of the questions that you had And in fact, we will design it so that it addresses many of them, and we'll take those questions that you have to create and develop our presentation for that January webinar. It will be on the 23rd of January, so be on the lookout for that as well. Again, thank you very, very much for your participation in this afternoon's webinar. We look forward to your ongoing participation, and Sue, thank you once again.
This is Sue. I want to thank all of you for spending this hour together. I so enjoyed it. And I saw that there was a question from Betty about a Northern California face-to-face workshop. I think I got an email today from CalPro that there's one in Fremont or something, so keep an eye out.
Yes, absolutely, Sue. I'm so sorry. I did not have that one scheduled at the time when we were finishing up your PowerPoint presentation, but we do have a face-to-face multi-level ESL workshop that will be happening in Fremont in Northern California. It is on the CalPro calendar, and the first face-to-face session for that one, I believe, is on November the 2nd. So please go ahead and look for that on our calendar as well. Thank you again.
Thank you, and good luck on your multi-level classes. Enjoy them. Bye-bye.